Welcome to ReThink You, bringing you ideas, inspiration, and motivation to start living the life you were created to live. Here is your host, author, trainer, speaker, and coach, and founder of ReThink You, Kim Levings.
Hello, and welcome back to the ReThink You podcast. Our theme this month is personal development. And our next speaker is another wonderful teacher and experienced professional. I'm excited to introduce you to David Emerald. David is a gifted author, speaker, educator, and leadership development professional. He is committed to, quote, facilitate the conscious evolution of humanity. In his best-selling book, The Power of TED, The Empowerment Dynamic, David developed frameworks that help people identify their drama roles and behaviors, and a revolutionary way to shift out of drama and into a more empowered way of living and relating. His most recent book, 3 Vital Questions, Transforming Workplace Drama, expands upon these frameworks and makes the transformation of drama to empowerment easier to grasp for business leaders, teams, and individuals. Throughout David's career, he has brought these frameworks to businesses around the world and has taught them at the University of Notre Dame's Stayers Center of Executive Education. You can find David at powerofted.com, and I would encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter co-authored by him and his partner, Donna. It is one of the most powerful newsletters I think I've ever subscribed to. I'm also excited to announce that as of this week, I am a certified trainer and coach with the 3VQ community. So you can see why I'm excited to bring David to you. But if you have a look at rethinkyou.com and go and take a look at the shop, you will see the 3VQ e-learning course is now offered by Rethink You. You can take this powerful course to shift from drama to empowerment in your life. And I'm offering it at only $199 for the next 30 days. I've also bundled it. So for those of you who are ready to completely transform your life, invest in the You Inside Out program and now the 3VQ. The two together have an incredibly good price. All of these offers are at rethinkyou.com in the shop. So now, without further ado, let's introduce David Emerald. David, welcome to the Rethink You podcast. And as our listeners know, they are going to learn a lot from you today and about your work. But before we jump into the really juicy stuff, why don't you start us off by telling a little bit about yourself, your early upbringing, your career, and what got you started on this body of work called the Empowerment Dynamic, or TED, as we call it?
Well, thanks, Kim. I'm really delighted to be having this conversation with you. And actually, I was born in the Midwest in Ohio. I grew up in Ohio, and my undergraduate degree I designed was called Community and Communication. It was a combination of communications and community, because for as long as I can remember, the idea of how do we relate to one another, how do we build community, how do we engage in conscious relationships, for whatever reason has long been a part of my path. And a big part of the story behind the story of what led to TED was that I'm pausing because I don't want to try to count the years, but at least 25, now almost 30 years ago, I went through a series of life events that are captured in the autobiographical piece of What's in the Power of TED, in that 3 things occurred in my life. One was that my dad, who I had a very healthy and close relationship with, passed away at a much too young age. He was younger than I am now. My wife at the time and I were trying to start a family, and that was not working, and found out that I was declared medically infertile. And as a result of that, she was quite introverted. She really withdrew. I've long forgiven that, but our marriage dissolved. So my dad died, found out I couldn't have kids on my own, and my marriage dissolved. So I did a smart thing. I started working with a therapist, and I learned about the drama triangle. Actually, oddly enough, didn't know that it came from Dr. Cartman, but learned about the drama triangle and the roles of victim, persecutor, rescuer. And for me, Kim, it was a blinding, what I call a blinding flash of the obvious, in that, and I know this to be true for so many people, that when they first learn of the drama triangle and the interplay of those roles, it's like, oh, that helps me make so much sense of life events. And I'd been working with this therapist for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. And one morning I was doing what I just call my quiet time, which is a mix of meditation, prayer, sometimes journaling, oftentimes journaling, and some readings. And I was in kind of a prayerful, reflective, contemplative space. And I said a little prayer to the God of my understanding. I said, okay, God, I'm ready to surrender my victim stance in the world, but I need to know what's the opposite of victim. And immediately, Kim, the word creator came, and as quick as a snap of a fingers. And it was so stark that I just remember my eyes flying open because I didn't know what to expect, but I didn't expect that. And that was really the original epiphany. And it was just something that I would reflect on from time to time. And quite honestly, I would not think about for sometimes years at a time, until fast forward to the early 2000s. And I was doing some work at the University of Notre Dame. Well, an important part of the story is I had met Donna, who, as you know, became my wife and my partner. And she's a certified coach. And I was at Notre Dame. I had moved to the Pacific Northwest. We weren't married yet. And I came across a journal where I had done some playing around with an alternative triangle, because part of the reflection was, well, if creator is the opposite of victim, is there an opposite to the persecutor and to the rescuer? And so I came across that journal, and the next week I was at Notre Dame, and during a debrief of a 360-degree feedback tool called the Leadership Circle, the person I was meeting with made the statement, you know, people come in to see me and they're just such victims. And having rediscovered the thinking, I thought, well, I'm going to share this with him, see if it makes any difference. And it was just one of those magical, you know it as a coach when you have those magical conversations. And the next morning, he happened to be the last debrief and coaching session of the day. The next morning, I at the small South Bend, Indiana airport, called Donna. And she says, well, how are your coaching sessions yesterday? And I told her a longer version of the story. And you know Donna, you know how extroverted she is. And I get silence. And this is back in the days of the Verizon commercials of, can you hear me now? And I looked at my phone to see, and I've got 4 bars. I said, are you still there? And she said, yeah. She goes, is that original work? And I said, well, no, the drama triangle's been around since the 60s. She said, no, the other triangle. And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. It's just something I've been thinking about off and on for a few years. And she said, you've got to write that down. So I know that's a long explanation, but that's really what led to then the unfolding of, it was not, I didn't have the term TED. That came out about a week later as we were walking and talking, and it was like, what am I going to call this alternative triangle? But that's really the story behind the story, and what eventually led to the evolution of this body of work.
Thank you, David. What a great story. And it's testament to the fact that out of our mess comes our message. That is just a perfect example of that, of taking, what was going on in your life. And so if we slow it down a little and kind of back up and say, for those who are listening to the podcast who have never heard about this work, and they're like, okay, say that again. What are you talking about? Right. The drama triangle, the dreaded drama triangle, as you call it, and you've been given permission to call it that. And it includes 3 roles. And when I often, tell people about drama, they say, "What? I don't have drama in my life. I'm good. I'm in charge of everything." So there's 2 questions bundled into that paragraph from me, but maybe slow down. And I'm not going to ask you to reteach everything because I want everyone to take the course, but give us enough to understand what are the 3 roles and why do you believe everybody's stuck in them to some degree?
Well, actually, it's a great question, and there is a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to answer your last question first and then describe the triangle, because I think that the reason why we all experience the roles, which I will reintroduce, is that this begins with the mindset that we have as human beings. And the mindset that we have as human beings, that is our default mindset, is one that is primarily problem focused, anxiety based, and reactive in nature. It's what we call a problem orientation, and eventually refer to as a victim orientation, because we feel victimized by the problems that we face in our lives or that are coming at us. And I don't think we have the time to go deeply into it, but I'll say that there's a biological reason that mindset helped us survive as a species, and yet it is our default and is often unconscious. And it's in that mindset, or from that mindset, that we tend to then engage in the relationship roles and dynamics that are, and I'm going to put the air quotes around it, drama in nature. And in that, the central role of the drama triangle, or you're right, what I call DVT, because of its toxic nature, the central role is the role of victim. And we feel victimized anytime there's something that we want or we care about that we feel we don't have access to. And I don't want to deny that there is absolutely victimization in the world. And we all feel victimized from time to time, whether it's being in the wrong line at the grocery store again. But in order to be a victim, one must have a persecutor. And the persecutor could be a person, it could be a condition, a health condition, it could be a situation like a natural disaster. And then the third role is the role of rescuer. And the rescuer either is brought into the dynamic by the victim, or a rescuer may insert themselves into the dynamic to either fix or take care of or protect the victim, or go after the persecutor. And so those are the 3 roles: victim, persecutor, rescuer. And the reality is, Kim, that we all play all 3 roles, and that we can ping pong around those roles in the proverbial blink of an eye. But that set of relationship roles and dynamics, which, by the way, we learn those roles very, very early in life as a way of dealing with what's going on around us. And for a lot of us, or for a lot of folks, we feel like a day without drama is as good as it gets. And yet what we have found is that it can be much better than just a day without drama.
So true, because everyone does experience drama. As you were talking, I again saw myself ping-ponging around those roles just last evening over a situation. So it happens to all of us. So we're all in that drama, and you've sort of come up with, as you said, this alternative triangle that you called the empowerment dynamic, and so shortened it's TED. And because of the powerful brand of TED Talks, etc., you add a star after it, which I know has a great meaning. It's not just there for decoration, and it's about the alternating roles in the triangles. But perhaps talk to us a little about what is the alternative triangle. What are the empowerment roles?
Well, again, I'm going to enter into that through the mindset. So a big part of the work is moving and transcending the problem-focused victim orientation, and adopting an outcome-focused, what we call creator orientation, in which our focus is on what we want to create, what it is that we care about, and that we take what we call baby step actions in the process of creating. And it's about upgrading our human operating system from a problem focus to an outcome focus. From that operating system, then we can cultivate the roles that make up the empowerment dynamic. And again, using the symbology, if the drama is really DDT, which is toxic, we refer to the TED roles as the antidote to the toxic DDT roles. So the basic shift is the shift from victim to creator. And that started again with that original epiphany. And creators focus on what they want to create. And very importantly, they own their responsibility and ability to choose their response to whatever's going on in their lives, including stuff that happens that from the other mindset they would have reacted to as a persecutor. But instead of reacting to it as a persecutor, they can look upon it as a challenger. So challenger is the antidote role to the role of persecutor. And challengers are those people, conditions, or situations that call forth learning and growth. You know, whether they are welcome or unwelcome, wanted or not wanted, they're those things that cause us to stretch and grow. And then there is a helping role in the empowerment dynamic. And rather than rescuing, which, although well-intended, rescuers actually reinforce the powerlessness of the victim, the role of coach, which is the antidote to the role of rescuer, really sees the person that they're supporting as a creator in their own right. And to use coaching language is, whole and complete, and has the capability of making the choices that lead to the life that they want to create. I do want to quickly add that in this work, one need not be a professional coach like you are, like Donna is, that it's a role that we can play in supporting one another by asking questions to help the person that you're supporting clarify what they want, maybe clarify what they're up against in terms of their current reality, and certainly clarifying committed baby steps in their creating process. So again, the roles are creator, challenger, and coach.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. I think I should charge the listeners for getting teaching from the original source, right? and shifting, this all sounds well and good. But when you're in the heat of the moment, you're like, I still have to solve problem. This is still a problem. I've still got to get this out of my life right now. And this is just Pollyanna type thinking. What is your response to that? As I'm sure some listeners are feeling that way, saying, oh yeah, it's just more gobbledygook, but in reality, That's not the way life works.
Oh my goodness, I actually really appreciate that question, because this is not Pollyannish work, and this is not denying the reality that problems occur in our lives. And it's not, in the long run, an either or proposition. There are going to be times where a problem comes into our lives that we do need to react to, that we need to stabilize, take care of, et cetera. But if we're operating from that default, what we tend to do as human beings is we solve that problem, or we seemingly solve that problem. I can make the argument that from that orientation, we rarely sustainably solve problems, but we might deal with it in the moment, and then we go on to the next problem, and then we go on to the next problem. Whereas from that outcome focused creator orientation, we have the capacity to prioritize our problems, to choose the problems that we want to respond to rather than react, and to solve problems that are standing in the way of the outcomes that we want to create. So absolutely, we have to deal with problems. And sometimes it's about, when a problem occurs, being able to pause long enough to reframe it into an outcome. In other words, to say, why do I even care about this problem? And how can I focus on what it is that I really want that has me feeling anxious about the problem itself? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, David. And I think that what I've found too, and I'd love to sort of include that in the conversation, is that being outcome focused is not the same as being solution focused. So a solution may temporarily solve the problem, but it doesn't necessarily get you to what really matters, what you really want. Focusing on what you really want is the end goal. And am I phrasing that correctly?
Yes, and one of one of the notions that Donna brought into the work as we were evolving this over the years is really making the distinction between outcomes and goals, and not that goals are bad, but the distinction, not and the distinction is that outcomes tend to be more global, longer term, that really tap into heart and meaning. For us, whereas a goal may be laudable, and what Donna often says is that a goal can be a problem statement in disguise. And the example that she uses, that is just an example that so many of us can relate to, is that she was out walking one day and she said to herself in her head, she said, "Okay, Donna, it's time to lose those 20 pounds again," which is a laudable goal, right? And how many of us have had that thought? And as she continued to walk along, Donna does a lot of internal coaching of herself. She realized that, what she realized, what she really said to herself, it's time to lose those 20 pounds again, because that's part of what happens in that problem orientation is we tend to repeat coming back to because it's not sustainable. And as she thought further about it, she said, what is it that I really want? And what she came to, and this is an outcome statement, is that I want optimal health as I age. I want to experience optimal health as I age. And that shifted her whole relationship to weight, diet, exercise, all the things that contribute to that what will be for her as a lifelong outcome to live into. And by the way, over the years, she dropped those 20 pounds, but that was not what she was going after. It was, what choices did she make in service to that outcome of optimal health? So there is a very important difference.
Right. What choices you make in service to the outcome is just such an important phrase. I'm pleased you said that. And it's interesting, David, because I don't know that I shared this with you, even though in the last 2 weeks we spent a lot of time together. When I first discovered this framework, it was several years ago, coming up for 5 years now. And it was because of this shift of understanding goals versus, this whole mindset shift, that I was finally able to quit smoking. And I'm coming up to 5 years as a non-smoker. And I never think about it. And I often quote this as an example of problem versus outcome, because when I was problem focused, the focus was on smoking. So the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to smoke. The minute I thought about the outcome, by quitting smoking, the longevity of being able to travel well, being able to enjoy my time with my grandson, to live longer, I made this huge list of outcomes. Easy peasy. I quit. Mm-hmm. And before that, I'd been a serial quitter. I kept, like to Donna's point, I kept going back to it again and again and again. But such an important aspect to life. And another point, because I actually wanted to talk to you a little about what you've seen amongst individuals and even organizational leadership coming out of the COVID crisis. But let me sort of point out my personal story about that. And I include myself in this because even as coaches, we're always works in progress. And I've had my own issues, but I said, in COVID, we now jokingly say that we all gained weight because of COVID. I said, no. COVID was the circumstance. The weight gain was a choice.
Very good. Yeah.
We're always at choice. So sometimes we unwittingly make ourselves victims and, kind of like the devil made me do it type thinking. But what have you seen amongst people as a result of COVID? How have people handled it? And have you seen people go deeper into drama, or have you seen people actually use the opportunity to come out of it?
Great question. And the short answer is both. I think the place that I would start in answering that question is back to the notion that victimization is part of the human experience. So I think it's fair to say that we've all, planet-wide, we have been victimized by this virus called COVID. And back to then connecting to the triangles, we could either react to COVID as a persecutor and say, I'm feeling victimized, and so I'm going to stuff that victimization by stuffing food or drink or whatever, and really take on the mantle of what I call victimhood, which is different than victimization, by the way. Victimhood is an identity and a way of being. So I could be in relationship to COVID from the standpoint of victimhood and say, the COVID-20 or whatever it gets referred to, COVID-15, is not my fault. It's because of the virus. I have seen other people actually, and this is being able to see COVID not as a persecutor, but as a challenger, and to raise that question or to step back and say, what's here for me to learn? What can I actually gain from this? And one of the things that I've seen both personally and organizationally in the work that I've done with leaders and in organizations is, I think it's been a surprise to many of us. Here we sit on Zoom, and this is not to, there are other platforms that can do the same thing, but the ways of connecting virtually that have happened, as you know, because you mentioned that we were together over the last couple of weeks with the 3 Vital Questions trainer certification. We had people from 5 countries. We had someone from India, we had someone from Germany, from France, from the US, from Canada. And the chances are great that the folks from India and Europe would not have been able to pay for the travel and anyway, that there have been a lot of people who have actually risen to different levels of interaction that have made choices around their health. I know of one story early on that a colleague of ours shared with us about the CEO of a company that used to be, that pre-pandemic was kind of your classic, this is business, let's get on with things, let's cut to the quick when it came to meetings, that this CEO, as they started to have to meet via the internet, would always take time to have people check in. How are you doing? Share something about your family, and took the leadership team's understanding and connection with one another to a much deeper level. So again, I think there's been this really interesting range of responses to COVID over the last 18 months.
Fabulous, David. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story, because you're so right. It is what I've seen. And unfortunately, some people stayed trapped in the victimhood with COVID as the persecutor. And as we said, the rescuer was various addictive behaviors. The rest of us said, what can I do with this? What is here for me to learn? And in fact, that's a great transition, because I know I took the ReThink You programs and created online learning and sort of created my e-learning school. And I know you did the same, because we've kind of skipped over, not intentionally, but I'd like to circle back to it now, the 3 vital questions, to say, how did the 3 vital questions take the drama to empowerment work to the next level for organizations? And then, of course, COVID for you also gave you the opportunity to create the e-learning program, which so many people, including me, are benefiting from. And as I've told my listeners, I'm reselling that at ReThink You right now at a great price for 30 days, just as an introductory rate. So why don't we take a few minutes now to talk about the 3VQ and what it stands for?
Sure. Well, 3VQ does stand for the 3 vital questions. And inherently, we've already talked explicitly about 2 of them without naming it, so I'll name them. So the mindsets relate to the first of the 3 vital questions, which is, where are you putting your focus? It has to do with our thought process, our mindsets, and a big part of that work is the upgrading from a problem to an outcome orientation. And then the second vital question is, how are you relating? And how are you relating to others? How are you relating to what's going on in your life, like COVID? How are you relating to yourself? And are you relating in ways that produce or perpetuate drama, hence the DDT? Or are you relating in ways that empower others and yourself to be more resourceful, resilient, and innovative? And of course, that speaks to the TED roles and how to shift from DBT to TED. And then the third vital question, which has been implied in some of what we're talking about, is what actions are you taking? And are you merely reacting to the problems of the moment, which is what you'd be doing out of that victim orientation, or are you taking generative and creative action, including the solving of problems, in service to outcomes? And that's all about, clarifying to the best of one's ability the outcomes that we want to create or that I want to create, telling the truth about current reality, and then moving from current reality toward that envisioned outcome via what we call baby steps. And the idea of we create anything in our lives a baby step at a time, and kind of illustrated that with Donna's story about optimal health.
So true. And in fact, a thought came to mind as you said, excuse me, as you said, baby steps. My daughter, and who often listens to this podcast, she'll be amused by this, but when she was a teenager, long before I knew about baby steps, as a coach, I used to say to her, you get overwhelmed by looking at the whole mountain and saying, how on earth am I going to climb it? I'm asking you to take the first step. The rest will figure it out as you go. Just take the first step. Don't worry about the top of the mountain. And I always remember that as a concept of understanding baby steps. And when we don't take baby steps, if we try and go in too quickly, too fast, we in turn actually end up back in a victim situation. And we are our own worst persecutors, which is why what Donna teaches about goals. So we've kind of come full circle in the discussion.
Well, and if I can just piggyback on that very quickly, and let me just share with you that when I first introduced the notion of baby steps in a very intensive leadership development program that I used to run for a major Midwest bank, because a big part of my background is in executive development, leadership development, organization development, I introduced the notion of baby steps and was surprised that it was something that really stuck for people. And I did it just as a humorous way of describing something. Actually came from watching the movie What About Bob, as a quick aside. But when I checked with people about why was that such an important concept to you, and it's essentially the same point that you're making in your story, is that what I got back from people, they said, in our organization, we do so much planning, and we're expected to plan all the steps from A to Z before we're in action. And that the value of baby steps is, if I'm engaging that tension between what I want and really tell the truth about current reality, the next few steps are readily apparent. And the freedom, the empowerment was the word that they used, the empowerment that comes from realizing I don't have to have it all figured out, but I can figure out what the next steps should be. And that's what baby steps is all about.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And again, I just love it when we talk because, excuse me, you sparked the creator in me. And I just thought of a great example, a great metaphor. My listeners know, my students know I use metaphor a lot. And
that's awesome.
This last weekend, I was building a new desk because I'm in the process of building a new office. And I had ordered the desk, and, in this day of self-assembly, at first I tried to hire somebody and the price was so ridiculous. I'm like, that's crazy. I'll just do it myself. And I've assembled furniture before, but as you were talking, the visual came to mind and how well this desk was presented. I won't give this the name of the organization. I'm not going to promote them, but every step had its own little bag of screws and whatever hardware you needed. So they had these long strips and each one was labeled. There were 32 steps to assembling this desk. I didn't look at step 32. I opened the manual and I looked at step 1. And there were some steps, there was literally one little screw and you had to put it in one little hole. And that was that step. And step by step by step, I put this entire unit together and I thought, wow, that was easy. Had I looked at the whole picture, as you said, and tried to figure it all out, I would have got overwhelmed. But instead, I just thought I can do step 1. Oh, I can do step 2. And 15 steps later, I'm like, oh, I'm on a roll. I can see how it's coming together. I'll just keep going. And what a great metaphor for life. And I'm sorry now that I didn't take pictures of all those baggies before I cut them up and threw them away.
That is a great metaphor. And if I can, speaking of metaphor, because we haven't mentioned this to your listeners, is both of my books, both The Power of TED and The Three Vital Questions, are story-based. So they're written as fables, that they are not nonfiction books, they are fables that illustrate so in a sense, they're big metaphors for the work that we're talking about.
Oh, that's wonderful, David. Yeah, I encourage people to get the book and better still take the course. So as we wind up here, I only had a couple more questions. The one was also, and I know you've given us some illusion, but is there one powerful transformative story that always sticks with you, either personally or professionally, from somebody else's life, that you saw the unbelievable impact of your work that's maybe come out of the community?
Sure. There are a number, but I'll share the one that immediately came to mind. And this happened, I don't know, probably 6-7 years ago. And Donna and I were presenters at the monthly meeting of one of the big coaching, the ICF chapters in Dallas, Texas. And so we were signing books as people were coming in. And this one gentleman stopped and he said, I really want you to sign this book. And would you also sign it not only to me and to my wife? I may get a little teary here. And as I was signing it, he said, I just want you to know that this book saved my marriage. He said, and the short version of his story is he said that he and his wife were having a really rocky time. He went to and got a hotel room, and that one of his very good friends came to see him at the hotel and said, you've got to read this book, and gave him a copy of TED. He read it that night. He took it to his wife and said, would you please read this book, and afterwards can we talk? And that the shift from drama to empowerment, to everything that we've been talking about, saved his marriage, and they're married to this day.
Oh, wonderful, David. Thank you for sharing that, because as I said, I know the power of this work. And talking about that and talking about outcome, I want to close with this question. But before I ask you the closing question, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you'd like to speak to before we close?
Well, I certainly do want to acknowledge Donna's contribution to this work,
Yes.
and especially she's been in the coaching world for, since before we met, and we met in 2003. So she brought a lot of the ways of thinking and some of the exercises out of the coaching world into really helping evolve the work. And then, as we were in transition from TED to what became Three Vital Questions, she and I, over the course of, 4 or 5 years, did a series of what we called 2-day deeper dives. Of course, this is back when we could do live training. And that really helped us hone what has become the Three Vital Questions, and what is the basis for that 2-day program, is the basis for the certification process that you went through, along with the development of the 8-unit e-course that you're offering, and that has had really powerful impact and is great for teens as well. So I just wanted to share that Donna has been a partner in the evolution of this work in many, many ways.
Yes, powerful. Thank you, David, for that. And Donna is very instrumental in it, and you make a great team. I can say that, having come off of your certification, how well you play together, and you both play to your strengths. So I'm blessed to know you both. And part of the closing question is related to that. I know you have a much bigger vision and a legacy you'd like to leave behind. So talk to us as we close. What is your future desired outcome, and what are the steps that you're taking towards that through the coaching and training community that you and Donna are creating?
Boy, how much longer do we have? No, I'm just kidding. I'll make
You
this.
can have as long as you like, David.
I want to go back to where we started with the story behind the story. And I consider myself, like a lot of people in our culture, as being spiritual, but not necessarily religious. And I say that because I was blessed, graced, whatever word you want to use, with that epiphany of when I, in that prayerful state, said, okay, to the God of my understanding, I need to know what the opposite of victim is, and creator immediately was spoken into my mind. And so this work is not about me. This work is not about Donna. This work is the work that has called me forth for the last, and it's in different ways, really in the last almost 30 years, but especially in the last 20 years. And so our focus really is on the legacy of the work, not the legacy of David, not the legacy of Donna, but the legacy of the work, and doing whatever we can to ensure that this work can serve future generations. So our focus has been on growing our certified trainer community, which you are now a part of, having created the e-course, which can be done individually on one's own, and as said before, can be done by a group and with a trained facilitator facilitating conversations as part of the unfolding of that. And so the long-term vision is that this work is not dependent in any way on Donna and I, and that it can be, again, work that serves future generations. And what I often say, you've heard me say this in closing some of our times together in the certification, is that we're in a time of history where we need all hands on deck. We need everyone doing the work of what I call facilitating the conscious evolution of humanity. And we do that in the workplace, we do that in our families, we do that in our neighborhoods and communities. And so it's about bringing in people like yourself who share the same heartfelt commitment to continuous improvement and growth. And just paraphrasing something you said earlier, what we say, and we say this, is you cannot do this work without doing this work, meaning that it's not work that you just, you go and learn it and you teach it to other people and you don't practice it in your own life. This is a lifelong journey. And so that's really our focus, is over that horizon of what do we need to be putting in place, and we are doing it a baby step at a time to ensure that this can reach future generations.
Fabulous, David. Thank you so much. Well, it has been a joy and an honor to host you. So I know that our certification coaching training community will enjoy listening to this episode. I'll share it with them. Thank you again so much for giving us a piece of your day.
Kim, my pleasure. And I'm so glad that you're part of the community.
Thanks, David. Bye for now.